They dressed her like a sacrifice. White silk so thin it hid nothing. Hair brushed until it gleamed. Skin oiled with perfumes meant to entice. Isolde stood before the mirror in her family's manner and didn't recognize the woman staring back at her. Lamb to the slaughter, she thought. That's what I am. Her mother's hands were cold as they fastened the final clasp at Isolde's throat, a silver chain with a pendant bearing their family crest, a collar, a brand, a message to the Lycan king that read, "She belongs to you now. Do what you will." "You should be honored," her mother said, though her voice carried no warmth. The king requested a companion for the treaty negotiations. Our family was chosen to provide one. Companion? Such a pretty word for what Isolde was being sent to do. How long? Isolde asked. Her voice came out steady. She'd learned long ago not to let them see her break. 3 nights. Perhaps more, if you please him. Her mother's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Try not to disappoint us, Isolde. The family's standing depends on your performance. Performance. Like she was an actress. Like warming the Lycan king's bed was a role she'd auditioned for rather than a sentence she'd been handed. Isolde said nothing. There was nothing to say. The carriage ride to the king's castle took 4 hours. Isolde spent them staring out the window, watching the landscape blur past, trying not to think about what awaited her. She'd heard stories about the Lycan king. Everyone had. They said he was ancient, 3 centuries old at least. They said he was brutal, cold, that he'd torn out the throats of enemies with his bare teeth. They said he went through bed companions like wine, enjoying them for a night or two before discarding them and calling for fresh entertainment. 3 nights, Isolde reminded herself. I can survive 3 nights. She'd survived worse. Growing up in her family's manor, invisible and unloved, nothing but a bargaining chip waiting to be spent. She'd survived her father's indifference and her mother's cruelty. She'd survived being told, over and over, that her only value lay in what her body could provide. 3 nights with a monster was just another form of survival. The castle loomed against the darkening sky like something from a nightmare. Black stone walls, towers that pierced the clouds, torches that flickered with flames the color of blood. Guards in dark armor lined the entrance, their eyes tracking Isolde as servants helped her from the carriage. She was led through endless corridors, past tapestries depicting battles, past suits of armor that seemed to watch her pass, past doors that led to rooms she would never see. Finally, they stopped before a set of massive oak doors, carved with wolves mid-hunt. The king's chambers. Wait here, the servant said, and disappeared inside. Isolde stood in the corridor, her heart pounding against her ribs. The silk of her gown did nothing to ward off the chill. She was cold. She was terrified. She was. The doors swung open. Enter. The voice was deep, commanding. It resonated in Isolde's chest like the toll of a bell. She stepped inside. The king's chambers were vast. A sitting area with leather chairs before a roaring fireplace, walls lined with books, and beyond them, through an archway, the shadow of a massive bed. But Isolde barely registered any of it. Her attention was fixed on the man standing by the window. The Lycan king was not what she'd expected. She'd imagined old, weathered, monstrous. Instead, she found herself staring at a man who appeared no older than 30, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell past his collar. His profile was sharp, strong jaw, straight nose, lips pressed into a firm line. He wore simple clothes, black trousers, and a white shirt open at the collar. Nothing like the finery she'd expected from a king. Then he turned, and she saw his eyes. Amber, gold, burning with an intensity that made her want to fall to her knees. He looked at her for a long moment. His gaze travelled from her face to her barely concealed body to the pendant at her throat. Something flickered in his expression, there and gone before she could name it. They sent you to warm my bed. It wasn't a question. Isolde's mouth went dry. Yes, Your Majesty. And you came willingly. The question caught her off guard. No one had asked if she was willing. No one had cared. I came because I was told to, she said carefully. My family? I didn't ask about your family. I asked about you. He moved closer, and she had to fight the urge to step back. He was so large, so present. The heat of him reached her even from 3 feet away. Did you want to come here tonight? Isolde's training screamed at her to lie, to smile and say yes, of course, it's an honor, to be the willing sacrifice her family expected. But something in those amber eyes made lying impossible. No, she whispered. I didn't want to come. She braced herself for anger, for punishment, for rough hands tearing away her flimsy gown. The king nodded slowly. I thought not. He turned away from her, walking toward the fireplace. Isolde stood frozen, confused, waiting for the trap to spring. There's a bedroom through that door, the king said, gesturing to the archway. The bed is warm. The sheets are clean. There's a lock on the inside. Use it if you wish. Isolde blinked. I don't understand. What's to understand? You're tired. You've had a long journey. Go to sleep. He settled into one of the leather chairs by the fire, his back to her. I'll guard the door. No one will disturb you. But I was sent to... I know what you were sent to do. His voice was quiet, final. I'm not interested. The words hit her like a slap. Not interested. Of course he wasn't. She was nothing special, just another sacrifice in a long line of them. He probably had dozens of beautiful women throwing themselves at him. Why would he want... You misunderstand me. The king's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. He still hadn't turned around. I'm not interested in taking a woman who doesn't want to be taken. I'm not interested in fear dressed up as willingness. I'm not interested in your family's politics or their desperate attempts to curry favor. Isolde's heart was pounding. Then what are you interested in? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. Go to sleep, Isolde. We can talk in the morning. He knew her name. She hadn't told him her name. She should argue. She should insist on fulfilling her duty. She should be the obedient daughter her family had raised her to be. Instead, she walked to the bedroom doorway and paused. Why? She asked. Why are you doing this? The king finally turned to look at her. In the firelight, his amber eyes seemed to glow. Because you deserve one night where no one expects anything from you. Because you've clearly had precious few of those. His gaze held hers, steady and sure. And because I don't take what isn't freely given? Isolde stared at him. This ancient king, this monster from the stories, this man who could have had her any way he wanted and instead told her to sleep while he guarded the door. Thank you, she whispered. Something softened in his expression. Lock the door behind you. She did. And for the first time in her life, Isolde slept without fear. She woke to sunlight streaming through windows she didn't remember. For a moment, Isolde lay still, disoriented. The bed beneath her was impossibly soft. The sheets smelled of lavender and something else. Pine, maybe. Wood smoke. The scent stirred something in her chest, though she couldn't say what. Then memory returned, and she sat up with a gasp. The king's chambers, the locked door, his voice telling her to sleep while he guarded the entrance. She was still wearing the flimsy silk gown her mother had chosen, still wearing the collar with her family's crest. But she was alone and unharmed, and a knock at the door made her flinch. "Isolde?" The king's voice, low and careful. "Are you awake?" She pulled the sheets higher, as if they could shield her from whatever came next. "Yes. There's food out here. And clothes. Proper clothes." A pause. "Take your time. I'll be in the sitting room when you're ready." Footsteps retreated. Silence followed. Isolde sat in the bed for a long moment, trying to understand. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to wake in his arms, used and discarded. She was supposed to feel shame and relief in equal measure. She was supposed to be counting down the hours until her sentence ended. Instead, she was confused. She unlocked the door and cracked it open. A tray sat on the floor, fresh bread, fruit, cheese, a pot of tea still steaming. Beside it, a folded stack of clothes, real clothes, a simple blue dress, soft wool stockings, a shawl for warmth. Isolde stared at them like they might bite. She dressed quickly, her fingers clumsy with the unfamiliar kindness of it all. The dress fit perfectly. How had he known her size? The wool was warm against her perpetually cold skin. When she finally emerged into the sitting room, she felt almost human. The king was exactly where he'd said he would be, seated by the fire, a book open in his lap. He looked up when she entered, and something flickered across his face. Approval, maybe, or satisfaction. "Better," he said. "You looked half frozen in that silk." "My mother chose it." "Your mother has questionable taste." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit. Eat. You must be hungry." She was. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, too nervous to keep anything down. But she hesitated at the edge of the chair, uncertain of the rules. "This isn't a trick," the king said quietly. "There's no hidden price. No test you're failing. Just food." Isolde sat. She reached for the bread, then stopped herself. "I don't understand what's happening." "What's happening is breakfast." His voice was dry, but not unkind. "Generally, it involves eating." "You know what I mean?" She met his eyes, searching for the trap. "I was sent to warm your bed. You refused. But you haven't sent me away. You haven't—" She gestured helplessly. "Why am I still here?" The king set his book aside. In the morning light, she could see him more clearly. The sharp angles of his face, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. He looked tired, not in body, but in soul. "Do you know why nobles send women to my bed?" he asked. "To curry favor, to secure alliances, to control me." His voice was flat. "They think if they send a beautiful enough woman, I'll be so overcome with lust that I'll agree to anything. They think I'm an animal who can be led around by his cock." He smiled, but there was no humor in it. 3 centuries, and they still haven't learned. Isolde's cheeks burned. "I wasn't trying to control you." "I know. You were just the weapon they chose." His amber eyes held hers, steady and sad. "That's why I refused. You're not a tool to be used, Isolde. Not by them, and not by me." Something cracked in her chest. a wall she hadn't known she'd built. "No one's ever said that to me before," she whispered. "Then the people in your life have failed you." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Tell me about yourself, not your family's ambitions or your mother's schemes. You." Isolde opened her mouth, then closed it. No one had ever asked her that question. She wasn't sure she knew how to answer it. "I don't know what you want me to say." "Say whatever you want, or say nothing at all. There's no wrong answer." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the fire. Then slowly she began to speak. "I like to read. My family thinks it's a waste of time. Women aren't supposed to have thoughts, only beauty. But when I was young, there was a servant who taught me letters in secret. She was dismissed when my mother found out. But by then I could read anything. I used to steal books from my father's study. He never noticed." She laughed, but it was hollow. "He never noticed anything about me." "What kind of books?" The question surprised her. "History mostly, philosophy, poetry sometimes." She hesitated. "I know it's strange. A woman reading philosophy." "It's not strange." The king's voice was firm. "It's rare and admirable. Most people sleepwalk through their lives without ever questioning the world around them. The fact that you seek knowledge despite being told you shouldn't, that takes courage." Isolde stared at him. "You're not like the stories." "The stories are written by people who've never met me." He smiled, and it transformed his face, made him younger, softer, almost approachable. "I'm Theron, by the way. I realized I never told you my name." "Theron," she repeated. It felt strange on her tongue, too intimate. He was the king. She should call him Your Majesty, maintain proper distance. But he'd given her clothes and food and safety. He'd let her sleep behind a locked door while he guarded the entrance. He'd asked her about herself, like her answer mattered. Maybe distance wasn't what either of them needed. "How long am I to stay here?" she asked. "That depends." "On what?" "On you." Theron leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "You were sent for 3 nights. You can leave whenever you want. I'll have a carriage prepared within the hour if you say the word. Or you can stay, eat real food, read any book in my library, sleep in a warm bed without fear." His amber eyes caught hers and held them. "The choice is yours, Isolde. For perhaps the first time in your life, the choice is entirely yours." She should leave. She should go back to her family and tell them the king wasn't interested, that their scheme had failed, that she was as worthless as they'd always believed. But the fire was warm. The dress was soft. And the man across from her was looking at her like she was something more than a pawn. "I'll stay," she said. "For now." Theron smiled. It was a small thing, barely a curve of his lips, but it made something flutter in Isolde's chest. "Good," he said. "The library is through the east door. I think you'll find the philosophy section particularly extensive." Isolde stared at him. This king who gave instead of taking, who asked instead of demanded, who looked at her like she was a person instead of a possession. She didn't trust it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But for the first time in her life, she wanted to. The second night, she didn't lock the door. Isolde told herself it was an accident, an oversight. She'd spent the day lost in Sharon's library, a vast room filled with more books than she'd seen in her entire life, and returned to the chambers exhausted and overwhelmed. She'd simply forgotten. But when she woke in the dark hours of the morning, gasping from a nightmare she couldn't escape, the door was still unlocked, and some part of her was glad. She lay in the darkness, trembling. The nightmare had been the same one she'd had for years. Her mother's voice, cold and cutting. Her father's turned back. The endless parade of suitors who looked at her body and never once saw her face. And underneath it all, the crushing certainty that she would never be anything more than what they made her. A possession, a commodity, a thing to be traded. Isolde pressed her hands to her eyes, trying to force the images away. She was 23 years old, and she'd never once felt like a person, never once been treated like she mattered. Until now. A soft knock at the door. "Isolde?" Theron's voice. She should tell him she was fine. She should maintain the walls she'd spent a lifetime building. "Come in," she heard herself say. The door opened. Theron stood in the threshold, wearing loose sleep clothes, his dark hair dishevelled. In the dim light, he looked less like a king and more like a man. Worried, uncertain, human. "I heard you cry out," he said. "Are you all right?" "Just a nightmare." She sat up, pulling the blankets around herself. "I'm sorry I woke you." "Don't apologize." He moved into the room but stopped several feet from the bed, giving her space. Respecting boundaries she hadn't even asked for. "Do you want to talk about it?" "There's nothing to talk about, just old memories." "Memories of what?" Isolde was quiet for a long moment. She'd never told anyone about the dreams, never admitted the fears that lived inside her like parasites, eating her hollow from within. But Theron was looking at her with those steady amber eyes, and she found herself speaking anyway. "My mother used to tell me stories when I was young, about women who were traded for alliances, sent to warm the beds of powerful men, used up and discarded when they were no longer useful." Her voice came out flat, dead. "I thought they were warnings, cautionary tales. It wasn't until I was older that I realized they were instructions. She was preparing me for what I would become." Theron's expression darkened. "She told you this as a child?" "She told me many things. That my face was my only asset, that my mind was a liability, that the best I could hope for was to be useful enough that someone would keep me." Isolde laughed, but there was no humor in it. "She wasn't wrong. Look at me, sent to your bed like a gift basket, hoping you'd find me pretty enough to favor my family." "Isolde. The worst part is, I don't even blame her." She finally looked at him, and her eyes were dry. She'd cried out all her tears years ago. "She did the same thing. Her mother before her. It's all we know. All we're allowed to be." She shrugged, a gesture that felt like surrender. "I thought you would be the same. Another man who saw a body instead of a person. Another chapter in the same story my mother told me." Theron was silent for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and sat on the edge of her bed, close enough to touch, but not touching. His amber eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Your mother was wrong," he said quietly. "About all of it. You don't know. I know that you're more than your face. I know that your mind isn't a liability. It's the most fascinating thing about you. I know that you've spent one day in my library and already asked questions that most scholars never think to ask." His voice was fierce, certain. "I know that you were taught to believe you're worthless, and I know that every person who taught you that was a fool." Isolde's throat tightened. "Theron, you are not a gift basket. You are not a commodity. You are not a thing to be used and discarded." He reached out, slowly, and took her hand. His touch was warm, gentle. "You are a person, Isolde, a remarkable one. And anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve to know you." She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. No one had ever said these things to her. No one had ever looked at her like this, like she was precious and worthy and real. "Why do you care?" she whispered. "I'm no one. I'm nothing to you." "You're not nothing." His thumb traced across her knuckles. "From the moment you walked into my chambers, I knew you were different. You weren't performing. You weren't pretending. You were terrified, and you came anyway, because you thought you had no choice. And when I gave you that choice, when I told you to sleep while I guarded the door, you looked at me like I'd given you the world. You did." The words slipped out before she could stop them. "No one has ever. I've never felt safe," he finished quietly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Theron shifted closer. His free hand came up to cup her face, tilting it toward his. His touch was achingly gentle, like he was handling something fragile, something precious. "You're safe here," he said. "With me. For as long as you want to stay." Isolde's heart was pounding. He was so close. She could see the gold flecks in his amber eyes, could feel the heat of him radiating through the thin fabric of her nightgown. Her body swayed toward him without her permission, drawn by something deeper than thought. "Theron," she breathed. "I'm not going to kiss you." His voice was rough, strained. "Not tonight. Not until you're certain you want it. Not until you know, truly know, that saying no carries no consequences." "What if I want you to?" "Then you'll want it tomorrow too, and the day after that." His thumb traced her cheekbone, feather light. "I've waited 300 years for something real, Isolde. I can wait a little longer to be sure you feel the same." Something broke open in her chest. A dam she'd built so carefully, holding back everything she'd never allowed herself to feel. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I don't know how to trust, how to want things for myself, how to believe that kindness doesn't come with strings." "Then we'll figure it out together." Theron leaned forward and pressed a kiss to her forehead, soft, reverent, asking nothing in return. "I'm not going anywhere." He stood, walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. "Lock the door if you want," he said. "Or don't. Either way, I'll be right outside, and nothing will hurt you while I'm here." He left. Isolde sat in the darkness, her hand pressed to the place where his lips had touched her skin. Her heart was racing. Her mind was spinning. Everything she'd been taught said this was a trap. Everything she'd experienced said kindness always came with a price. But Theron hadn't taken anything, hadn't demanded anything. He'd just given. She was falling for him. She knew it with terrifying certainty. This king who guarded her door. This man who touched her like she was precious. She was falling, and for the first time in her life, she didn't want to stop. Her mother arrived on the third morning. Isolde was in the library when she heard the commotion. Raised voices in the corridor, the sharp click of heels on stone, a tone she knew too well. Imperious, demanding, cold. Her blood turned to ice. She set down her book and moved to the doorway just as her mother swept into view, flanked by her father and two servants. Lady Vance was dressed in her finest silks, her face arranged in an expression of practiced concern that didn't reach her eyes. "There you are." Her mother's gaze raked over Isolde. The simple dress, the unbound hair, the book still clutched in her hands. Disapproval flickered across her features. "We've come to collect you. The 3 nights are over." Isolde's throat tightened. She'd lost track of time, lost track of everything except the library and the conversations and the way Theron looked at her like she mattered. "I wasn't aware the time had passed," she said carefully. "Clearly." Her mother's voice dripped with disdain. Look at you, dressed like a servant, reading of all things. What must the king think? The king encouraged it. Her mother's eyes narrowed. Did he? And did he also encourage you to forget your duty, your family, the entire reason you were sent here? Isolde said nothing. There was nothing safe to say. Her father stepped forward, his expression bored. He'd never had much interest in Isolde. She was a daughter, not a son, and therefore largely irrelevant to his concerns. The treaty negotiations are complete. Your services are no longer required. We're leaving within the hour. Your services? Like she was a piece of furniture they'd loaned out. Like she was nothing more than a body to be used and returned. 3 days ago, Isolde would have accepted this, would have gathered her things and climbed into the carriage and gone back to being invisible, back to being nothing. But that was before Theron, before safety, before someone looked at her and saw a person instead of a possession. What if I don't want to leave? The words came out before she could stop them. Her mother's face went pale. Excuse me? What if I want to stay? Isolde's voice was steadier than she felt. The king offered me a choice. He said I could leave whenever I wanted, or I could stay. I'm choosing to stay. Her mother laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. Don't be absurd. You weren't sent here to develop opinions. You were sent here to warm his bed and secure our family's interests. If you've failed at the former, the least you can do is— She hasn't failed at anything. Theron's voice cut through the corridor like a blade. He emerged from the shadows near the great hall, still dressed in the simple clothes he favoured, his amber eyes fixed on Isolde's mother with barely contained fury. Lady Vance had the grace to look momentarily intimidated. She dropped into a curtsy, her husband following with a stiff bow. Your Majesty, we didn't mean to disturb you. We've simply come to retrieve our daughter. Your daughter is not yours to retrieve. Theron moved to stand beside Isolde, and she felt his hand brush against hers. A question, a reassurance. She's a grown woman. She makes her own choices. With respect, Your Majesty, she was sent here under specific terms. 3 nights. Those nights are over and she's chosen to extend her stay. Theron's voice was ice. Unless you're suggesting I should force her to leave against her will. Lady Vance's mouth opened and closed. Of course not, but then I fail to see the issue. Isolde watched her mother struggle with a response. Lady Vance wasn't accustomed to being challenged. She'd spent her entire life arranging people like chess pieces, moving them where she wanted them to go. The idea that a piece might refuse to be moved clearly hadn't occurred to her. Isolde. Her mother turned to her, and her voice took on a different tone. Softer, more dangerous. Think about what you're doing. Think about your family, your sisters. Everything we've worked for. Everything we've worked for. As if Isolde had been a willing participant. As if she'd chosen any of this. I have thought about it, Isolde said. I've spent 3 days thinking about it. And I've realized something. What? I've spent my entire life being what you wanted me to be. A pretty face, a bargaining chip, a tool to advance the family's interests. She met her mother's eyes, and for the first time she didn't look away. I don't want to be those things anymore. I want to be a person. And for the first time in my life, someone is letting me. Lady Vance's face contorted with rage. You ungrateful little— That's enough. Theron's voice was soft, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Lady Vance, Lord Vance, your daughter has made her choice. You will respect it, or you will leave my castle and never return." The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then Lady Vance gathered her skirts, her expression settling into cold fury. "Very well. Keep her, then. But know this, Your Majesty. She's damaged goods. A disappointing daughter from a disappointing bloodline. Whatever you think you're getting, I assure you, you'll be disappointed." "I seriously doubt that." Theron's hand found Isolde's and held it tight. "Guards, please escort Lord and Lady Vance to their carriage. Their business here is concluded." Her parents were led away. Her mother didn't look back. Isolde stood in the corridor, trembling. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. She'd refused. She'd chosen. "Isolde!" Theron turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Are you all right?" "I don't know." She laughed, but it came out shaky. "I've never done anything like that before. I've never—" She stopped, overwhelmed. "I told them no. I actually told them no." "You did?" His voice was soft, proud. "How does it feel?" "Terrifying." She looked up at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "And wonderful, and like I might fall apart at any moment." "You're not going to fall apart." He cupped her face in his hands, his amber eyes holding hers. "You're the bravest person I've ever met, Isolde. You just walked away from everything you've ever known. You chose yourself. That takes more courage than most people will ever have." "I didn't just choose myself." The words came out fierce, certain. "I chose you. I chose this. I chose a man who let me sleep while he guarded the door, who gave me books instead of demands, who looked at me and saw a person when everyone else saw a commodity." Theron's breath caught. "Isolde!" "I'm done being afraid." She reached up and covered his hands with hers. "I'm done waiting until I'm certain, because I don't think I'll ever be certain about anything. All I know is that you make me feel safe. You make me feel real. And I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you." "You won't." His voice was rough. "I'm not going anywhere." "Then kiss me." She rose on her toes, bringing her lips closer to his. "Please. I've been wanting you to kiss me since the second night, and I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of being careful. I'm tired of—" He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't patient. 3 days of restraint came crashing down, and Theron kissed her like he was drowning and she was air. His hands tangled in her hair, his body pressed against hers, warm and solid and real. He kissed her like he'd been waiting 300 years for this exact moment. Maybe he had. Isolde melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. Every wall she'd ever built came crumbling down, and underneath was something new, something fierce and hungry and alive. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "Mine," Theron growled against her lips. The word wasn't a command. It was a promise. "You're mine, Isolde, and I'm yours. Whatever comes next, we face it together." "Together," she agreed. "I like the sound of that." He smiled, that real smile, the one that made him look young and happy and whole. "So do I," he said. "So do I." The mating ceremony was held in the library. It wasn't traditional. Lycan bonds were usually sealed beneath the moon, witnessed by pack and court alike. But when Theron asked Isolde where she wanted to make their union official, she hadn't hesitated. "Here," she'd said, gesturing to the towering shelves, the leather chairs by the fire, the window seat where she'd spent countless hours lost in philosophy and poetry. This is where I became myself. This is where you let me be a person. So here they stood, surrounded by books instead of courtiers, witnessed by firelight instead of moonlight. A priestess spoke the ancient words. Vows were exchanged. Not the formal declarations Isolde had grown up expecting, but real promises, true ones. I will guard your door, Theron said, his amber eyes blazing. For the rest of my life. I will give you choices, not commands. I will see you, really see you, every single day. Isolde's throat tightened. I will trust you, she answered. I will let you in. I will be brave enough to want things, and honest enough to tell you what they are. Then came the marking, Theron's teeth grazing her neck, leaving the bite that would proclaim her as his for all eternity. It should have felt like another collar, another brand, another claim of ownership. Instead, it felt like freedom. When the priestess departed, they were alone in the library, husband and wife, king and queen, two people who had found each other against impossible odds. Hello, wife, Theron murmured, pulling her close. Hello, husband. Isolde smiled against his chest. That's going to take some getting used to. We have time. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. We have forever. That night, he was gentle with her, patient. He touched her like she was something sacred, worshipped her like she was something holy. And when they finally came together, Isolde understood what all those philosophy books had never been able to teach her, that love wasn't just an idea. It was a feeling, a choice. A person who looked at you and saw everything you were and everything you could be. Afterward, they lay tangled in sheets, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. I love you, she said. The words came easily now. She'd said them before, whispered them in the dark, gasped them against his lips, murmured them in the quiet moments between. But they never lost their power, never stopped feeling like a miracle. I love you too. Theron's voice was rough with emotion. More than I knew it was possible to love anyone. More than 3 centuries taught me to hope for. Isolde lifted her head to look at him. In the dim light, he looked younger, softer, happy in a way she suspected he hadn't been in a very long time. Thank you, she said. For what? For that first night? For guarding the door instead of taking what you could have taken? She pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. You could have been like everyone else. You could have used me and discarded me and sent me back to my family with nothing. Instead, you gave me something I didn't even know I was missing. What's that? Myself. She smiled, and it was the smile of a woman who had finally found her place in the world. You gave me back myself. 6 months later, the invitation arrived. It came by royal courier, cream-coloured paper, gold-embossed seal, elegant script requesting the presence of King Theron and Queen Isolde at the wedding of Lady Celeste Vance to Lord Harren of the Eastern Territories. Isolde's youngest sister, getting married. She read the invitation 3 times before setting it down. Theron watched her from across the breakfast table, his expression carefully neutral. You don't have to go, he said. I know. They don't deserve your presence. After everything they did. I know. Isolde picked up the invitation again, studying her mother's familiar handwriting. Lady Vance had added a personal note at the bottom. Your attendance would mean a great deal to your sister. But it's not about them. It's about Celeste. Theron was quiet for a moment. Do you want to go? Isolde considered the question. 6 months ago, the thought of facing her family would have filled her with dread. 6 months ago, she would have been the invisible daughter in the corner, watching her sister shine while she faded into the background. But she wasn't that woman anymore. "Yes," she said, "I want them to see what I've become." They arrived at the Vance estate in a carriage bearing the royal crest. Isolde wore a gown of deep emerald silk, not the revealing costume her mother had once forced her into, but something elegant and regal and hers. A crown of silver and moonstone rested on her brow. Theron walked beside her in formal black, his hand steady on her arm. The whispers started the moment they entered the great hall. The Lycan Queen dash dash. That's the daughter they sent to warm his bed. Married him instead. She's stunning. Isolde held her head high and let them talk. Her mother found her before the ceremony. Lady Vance swept up in a rustle of silk, her expression caught somewhere between fury and calculation. "So, you came?" her mother said. "I did." "I didn't think you would, after our disagreement." Isolde smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "I came for Celeste, not for you." "Of course." Lady Vance's eyes raked over Isolde's gown, her crown, the mate mark visible at her throat. "You've done well for yourself, I'll admit. Better than I expected." "Better than you planned, you mean?" Her mother had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. "I did what I thought was best for the family." "You sent me to be used and discarded. You dressed me like a sacrifice and told me my only value was my body." Isolde's voice was calm, steady. "You were wrong. About all of it." "Isolde, I'm not finished." She stepped closer, and for the first time in her life, she saw something like uncertainty in her mother's eyes. "You spent 23 years teaching me I was worthless, that my mind was a liability, that the best I could hope for was to be useful enough that someone would keep me." She smiled again, and this time it was real, fierce, triumphant. "Theron didn't keep me because I was useful. He chose me because I was me, and I chose him back. That's something you'll never understand, because you've never seen people as anything other than pieces on a board." Lady Vance opened her mouth, closed it. For once in her life, she had nothing to say. "Enjoy the wedding, Mother." Isolde turned away, her emerald skirts sweeping behind her. "I know I will." She found Theron waiting by the windows, 2 glasses of wine in his hands. He offered her one, his amber eyes warm with pride. "How do you feel?" "Free." She took a sip, letting the wine warm her throat. "I finally said everything I've wanted to say for 23 years. And? And it felt wonderful." She laughed, bright and clear and unafraid. "I spent so long being invisible, being nothing, being whatever they wanted me to be. And now I'm standing in my family's great hall as the Lycan Queen, and my mother couldn't think of a single thing to say to me." "That's because you left her speechless." Theron set down his glass and pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You're magnificent, you know that. Absolutely magnificent." "I learned from the best." She tilted her head back to look at him. "A king who guards doors, who gives choices instead of commands, who saw a terrified woman in a silk nightgown and decided to let her sleep. Best decision I ever made." "Mine too." She rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. "I love you, Theron. Today, tomorrow, forever." "Forever," he agreed, "and even then, it won't be long enough." They stayed for the ceremony, watched Celeste marry her lord. accepted congratulations, and fielded curious questions, and let the entire noble court see exactly what the Vance family's disappointing daughter had become. And when they finally climbed back into their carriage, Isolde leaned against her husband's shoulder and smiled. She'd been sent to warm a king's bed. Instead, she'd warmed his heart and found her own in the process. Not bad for damaged goods. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. More Lycan King romances are coming soon. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.